The night a stranger in a reflective HOA vest told me to pack up my tent or face fines, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled because I had no idea then that her attempt to control a quiet camping weekend would end, with me owning the land beneath her rules. I'd been camping on a small parcel just outside a tightly managed HOA community, land I leased seasonally for solitude. No parties, no fires past curfew, just a tent, a chair, and the sound of wind through trees. That peace lasted exactly one evening before headlights stopped near my campsite and a woman marched over with a clipboard. She introduced herself as the HOA compliance officer. Karen Energy, full throttle. She said camping near community boundaries violated HOA standards. I told her calmly that I wasn't inside the HOA, wasn't a member, and wasn't subject to their rules. She disagreed loudly, citing community impact. I asked her to show me the boundary. She couldn't. The next morning, I woke to a violation notice zip-tied to my tent pole. It listed fines, towing threats, and mandatory compliance. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. I contacted the landowner, an older rancher who'd leased me the spot for years. He laughed when I explained what happened, and told me the HOA had been trying to buy the land for months. They wanted to expand trails, maybe build something later. He didn't like their tone, so he kept saying no. That afternoon, Karen returned with backup. Another board member. Phones out. Smug smiles. They told me the HOA would handle this. Officially. I asked again where the property line was. Again, no answer. Just threats. Instead of leaving, I pulled out the survey map I'd requested when I first leased the land. Clear lines. Clear ownership. I showed it to them. They waved it off and said their lawyer would deal with it. That was the moment something clicked. If they wanted the land so badly, if they felt entitled to police it without owning it, then the problem wasn't camping. The problem was that they thought they could push until people folded. So I made a phone call that afternoon. Not to argue. Not to complain. To ask a simple question that would change everything. How much would it take for you to sell? The rancher paused. Then he named a number. And suddenly, this wasn't a camping trip anymore. It was the beginning of a land deal that would flip the power dynamic forever. I didn't answer the rancher right away. I asked for a day to think, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be deliberate. Land purchases aren't emotional decisions, and I wasn't going to let an HOA's overreach rush me into a mistake. Still, that number echoed in my head as I packed up my camp for the night and drove home. By morning, I'd run the math. The parcel wasn't huge, but it was positioned perfectly. Open land with access roads, water rights, and zoning that allowed agricultural use. More importantly, it sat just far enough from the HOA boundary to be outside their authority, yet close enough to irritate them if they thought otherwise. I called the rancher back and told him I was interested, contingent on a clean title and updated survey. Word travels fast in small communities. By the end of the week, I heard from a neighbor that the HOA board was looking into the land situation. A formal letter arrived shortly after, claiming the area had historically been treated as common use space and that my camping activity was under review. The letter carefully avoided stating ownership. That omission told me everything. I hired a real estate attorney and ordered a fresh survey. Steel pins went into the ground again. Bright flags marking the boundary like punctuation. Marks in a sentence the HOA refused to read. The survey confirmed what the old map showed. The land was private. Always had been. Karen didn't appreciate that. She showed up again, this time with a cease and desist letter drafted by the HOA's lawyer. It warned against unauthorized land use and hinted at legal action. I asked her one question. Who owns this land? She said the HOA would prove it in court. I thanked her and took photos of her standing several feet inside the newly marked boundary. The rancher and I moved quickly. Escrow opened. Inspections scheduled. Title searches came back clean. The HOA tried a different angle, contacting the county about zoning violations. The county inspector visited, reviewed my permits, and shrugged. Camping was allowed. Agricultural use was allowed? No violations found. At the next HOA meeting, residents argued about escalating costs and legal exposure. Some wanted to back off. Others wanted to send a message. Karen pushed hardest, insisting that if they didn't stop me now, they'd lose control of the boundary forever. She was right about one thing. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers. The land was mine, but owning it was only the first step. What I planned to do with it would turn a simple power struggle into a permanent reminder that authority without ownership is just noise. And the HOA had no idea what was coming next. The first thing I did after closing wasn't celebrate. It was post signs. Real ones, weatherproof, clearly marked private property. No HOA. Authority beyond this point. I placed them exactly along the surveyed boundary, each one lined up with steel pins driven into the soil. It wasn't aggressive. It was factual. And facts made the HOA uncomfortable. Karen showed up the next weekend. She didn't come alone. 2 board members followed her, all 3 standing just outside the boundary, like they were afraid of crossing an invisible electric fence. She demanded to know what I was doing, claiming the signs were provocative. I calmly explained that I was exercising my rights as a landowner. She accused me of trying to antagonize the community. I replied that communities don't get to claim land they don't own. That conversation ended when I reminded her she was being recorded. Next came the letters. The HOA's attorney sent notice after notice, questioning access roads, noise, livestock limits, and community impact. Each one was answered by my attorney with citations, maps, and zoning confirmations. The back and forth grew expensive for them and boring for me, so I moved to Phase 2. I filed paperwork to convert the parcel into a small working ranch. Nothing extreme: fencing, a shed, grazing permits, agricultural tax classification, all legal, all approved. The county inspector came out, shook my hand, and wished me luck. The fence went up first. Simple post and wire, set precisely on my side of the line. Overnight, the HOA lost the illusion of open access. Trails they'd assumed were communal dead-ended at my fence. Residents complained. Karen blamed me. Then the animals arrived. A few goats, a pair of donkeys, later some cattle. All well within limits, all properly cared for. Ranch sounds replaced the quiet they thought they controlled. Not loud, just present, real. The HOA called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited. Didn't need to be. Their minutes, obtained later, were full of panic about declining property values and loss of aesthetic control. They debated buying the land from me. One board member asked if that was even possible. Karen said she'd handle it. She came to my gate with an offer. Below market, urgent. I declined. She threatened legal action. I reminded her of the surveys, the zoning approvals, and the fact that every visit she made was documented. Her confidence cracked for the first time. What the HOA failed to understand was simple. Once land changes hands, so does leverage. They'd tried to stop me from camping. Instead, they'd helped me build a ranch. And now, every decision I made on that land was a reminder that control doesn't come from clipboards or fines. It comes from ownership. By the time summer rolled in, the ranch was fully operational, and the HOA's tone had shifted from aggressive to desperate. Complaints still came, but now they were quieter, more carefully worded. Gone were the threats. In their place were concerns, requests, and hopes for cooperation. Power has a way of softening voices once it's lost. The HOA's biggest issue wasn't noise or animals. It was visibility. From certain backyards, residents could now see fencing, grazing animals, and a working shed instead of open, uncontrolled land. It reminded them daily that the boundary they'd ignored now mattered. Karen tried a new approach. She showed up one afternoon without backup, without a clipboard, acting almost friendly. She asked if I'd consider hosting community-approved events or limiting activity during peak hours. I listened politely, then asked her to point out any regulation that required my compliance. She couldn't. The conversation ended there. Behind the scenes, the HOA's finances started to strain. Legal fees mounted. Property owners questioned why dues were increasing when the board had lost every dispute. At the next election, several long-standing members were voted out. Karen barely kept her seat, and only because she ran unopposed. That didn't stop the pressure entirely. Anonymous complaints were filed with animal control. Inspectors came out, reviewed conditions, and left satisfied. A noise complaint followed. Same result. Each failed attempt weakened the HOA's credibility further. Meanwhile, the ranch brought unexpected benefits. Neighbors from outside the HOA stopped by, curious, supportive. Local schools asked about educational visits. A nearby farmer offered advice and equipment help. What started as a defensive move became something positive and sustainable. The turning point came when the HOA formally requested an easement. They wanted limited access through my land to reconnect a trail system residents missed. The request was polite, legal, completely optional. I considered it carefully. An easement would give them something they once assumed they could take. I proposed terms: fair compensation, maintenance responsibility, strict limits, no enforcement authority. They hesitated but ultimately agreed. The easement agreement was signed, recorded, and respected. For the first time, the HOA dealt with me as an equal, not a subject. That change mattered more than money. Karen resigned 2 months later. Her farewell message cited personal reasons. No mention of camping. No mention of ranches. No mention of land they never owned. As autumn approached, I sat by the fence line one evening, watching animals settle in for the night. The quiet was different now, earned, grounded. All of this had started because someone tried to tell me where I didn't belong. They were wrong. And in the end, the land itself made that clear. A year after the first warning notice appeared on my tent, the ranch no longer felt like a response to conflict. It felt like home. The fence lines were settled. The animals were routine. The paperwork was done. What once felt like defiance had turned into normal life. And that was the part the HOA never expected. The community adjusted in ways both subtle and obvious. HOA enforcement slowed overall, not just near my land. People asked more questions. Surveys were checked. Lawyers were consulted earlier. The board learned, the hard way, that authority only stretches as far as ownership allows. Beyond that, it collapses under scrutiny. I rarely heard Karen's name anymore. Her resignation created a vacuum that quieter, more cautious personalities filled. They focused on maintenance, not dominance. When they spoke to me now, it was through formal channels, respectful and precise. The ranch had changed the relationship permanently. Occasionally, someone new would wander near the fence and ask what happened. I told the story without exaggeration. No insults. No victory laps. Just facts. Most shook their heads at how easily it could have been avoided. A warning listened to. A boundary respected. A conversation instead of a confrontation. The ranch itself grew slowly. More fencing. Better water systems. Rotational grazing. Nothing flashy. Nothing disruptive. Just steady improvement. The land responded well to being cared for instead of claimed. That felt important. Looking back, I realized the HOA hadn't been trying to stop camping. They'd been testing how far they could push someone who seemed temporary. A tent is easy to dismiss. A landowner is not. Buying the land wasn't revenge. It was resolution. It turned uncertainty into clarity and replaced threats with recorded deeds. The ranch wasn't a statement to the HOA anymore. It was simply mine. The lesson stuck with me, and I share it whenever someone asks. If you're warned unfairly, don't react loudly. React correctly. Learn the rules. Document everything. Know where authority ends, because once you understand that line, no one can cross it without consequences. The irony is that if Karen had ignored me completely, I might have packed up and moved on. Instead, she pushed just hard enough to reveal an opportunity she never saw coming. Now, when I camp on my own land, it's different. There's no tension, no clipboard, no warning notices flapping in the wind. Just quiet, earned through preparation and patience. Sometimes, the best response to being told you don't belong here is to make sure you legally, undeniably do. And once you do, no one can take that away.